Bright is the new Netflix original movie directed by David Ayer, and Max Landis wrote this one also, and it stars Will Smith and Joel Edgerton.
Yeah.
So this one's kind of a weirder plot, I guess. It's like a modern day buddy cop movie, and it takes place sort of where mythical creatures exist within our world, modern day.
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept. It's like, imagine orcs, elves, fairies, all these,
Matadors,
fantastical.
things like that.
Yeah, there's even a dragon flying in one scene.
Yeah.
All these mythical creatures are now in our modern day, and it's very similar to our modern day. It's not like this thing where it's like, if we really had all these creatures, all the huge differences our world would be today. Right. But it's taking these fantastical characters and put them in our modern setting. And I really like the premise of this movie. I thought it was very interesting, and it's kind of cool with some of the things that they use the kind of orc and elves as metaphors for racism and classism and things like that. And like the orcs are kind of like the downtrodden minority, and then elves are there's a line where it says seeing an orc with a badge is like seeing an elf with a mop. Like they're the elite,
higher tier. Yeah, I agree with the concept. I saw the trailer and I wasn't too sure, but I think the concept ultimately does work. It is kind of cool to see this whole world and, like you said, the clashing of different races and things like that. And I think there's a lot of commentary there, if not forced commentary. I will say that one slight thing is that there's a lot of exposition right at the beginning of this movie to tell you where you are, where it doesn't really give you that much visual storytelling. It's honestly just a lot of people talking to each other, but talking to the audience.
That's one of the things with the dialogue in this movie. Sometimes the dialogue in this movie works really well.
Yeah.
And there's sometimes there's good banter between Joel Edgerton and Will Smith, but more often than not, like the dialogue's just too on the nose.
Yeah.
Like there's a moment where it's like they said, one of the cops says to the other, like, we need to call in the cavalry. And he's like, we are the cavalry. Just stuff like that where I'm just like, there's just those blatant kind of dialogue moments where you're just like, all right, it's a little too much in my face.
Yeah, and there's also times where I'm like, they could be using this to really build sympathy and relationships instead of world. There's a whole opening credits scene that really kind of builds what you're looking at, and you sort of get it through the graffiti, through the world that they're showing you, and then all of a sudden they have to shove it in your face within the first 15 minutes of what this actually is before the plot starts going. So let's talk about we won't go into huge spoilers in case you want to watch it, but let's go into the plot. How did you feel like it flowed?
I think that the pacing of this movie was about 15 minutes too long for me. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of it was in the beginning where they're just kind of barfing out all this exposition.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's one of the first conversations between Will Smith and Joel Edgerton's character. It's like you're starting to get the sense that they kind of hate each other.
Yeah.
But the scene goes on so long, I started to hate him a little bit. It was a thing where it's just, and there's just problems like that with this movie where there are things that I like, but the execution of it's just kind of sour.
Yeah, and this movie takes place in one night. It's like one bad night. It does remind me of End of Watch. There's a lot of tropes of Training Day in there as well to me, almost complete, utter scene taking out of Training
there's
Day.
A gangster won't kill the cop because the cop saved the gangster's family member. I'm like, David Ayer's ripping off his own movie.
His own movie, exactly. And that's why this movie feels wholly original, but also very unoriginal at the same time. I think the concept's great, but the execution is just kind of generic. And there are fun moments, and I will say with the pacing, yes, it's a pretty slow, groggy start. But once it gets going, I like that they jump from location to location.
Oh, yeah.
And I did start to like the relationship between Will Smith and Joel Edgerton's character. Will Smith, unfortunately to me, is just Will Smith.
It's hard to see him as anything else.
Yeah, he doesn't really have much to work with. As for Joel Edgerton, I didn't even see the guy. This makeup and special effects was great.
Yeah, and his performance was great. I think Joel Edgerton was my favorite part of this movie.
Easily. Show stealer. But then again, after those two characters, you really don't get much of anybody else. There is another person that tags along with them, and you learn nothing about them. She has almost zero to do with the relationships, and they really could have built upon some sympathy towards elves, towards orcs, towards, just human relationships in general. They could have touched on a little bit more deeply, but instead this movie sort of lacks heart.
The best way to describe this movie for me is inconsistent. There are times where the banter between Will Smith and Joel Edgerton, it feels like a good buddy cop movie, and I'm really enjoying it. And then sometimes it's just awkward. And really blatant dialogue. Like you said, it's like they are talking to each other, but they're more talking to the audience, relaying that information to them. Yeah. And sometimes just a little too obvious. Yeah. And then sometimes the action scenes are a lot of fun. Yeah, they're really cool. There are some cool. And sometimes they're just a little wonky and hard to follow. So just like it's inconsistent's the best way to say this movie. Like there's as many things I liked about it, there's many things I didn't like about it.
Yeah, and the trailer once again gives nothing away about the plot, and I like that. I sort of was surprised with the way the direction went with this plot. I thought it was going to go way more political, way more, and after it gets that out of the way, it really is a straight off like action movie with some cool ideas thrown in there. I didn't realize it was going to be so R-rated. This is a very violent movie. It's a lot of strong language and things like that. So I was going into this being more like PG-13ish, but I was kind of surprised and entertained by how adult this movie really was.
Yeah, there are definitely some vulgar language and moments in here. Yeah, but I think that it lends itself naturally to the script. I mean, Joel Edgerton's character plays the only orc police officer in the world. Yeah. The first and only.
So all eyes are kind of on him.
And I just like the way that his character, he didn't feel at home as a policeman because he was the only orc and he was discriminated by all the other humans. Yeah. And at the same time, like, for an orc to be a police officer is like betraying your own race. So he wasn't even welcome amongst the orcs too. So I think that gave his character some good dynamic and some really just the most to work with. And I think that Joel Edgerton was easily the standout.
Yeah, I agree. Buffs. All right, so we gave our thoughts on Bright, the new Netflix original movie. This is a huge budget too. It's the biggest budget for a Netflix movie. So how do you think they executed sort of a movie blockbuster on the Netflix screen? Give it a score.
I really enjoyed parts of this movie, and there's parts I didn't like. I would say the good outweighs the bad slightly, but it's good to see Netflix to try to make ambitious. I will say this movie's very ambitious, and in parts it pays off, in parts it doesn't. But it's good to see that Netflix is really trying to push the envelope and show the theater chains like, hey, we can make these big movies too. So I do appreciate the ambition, but it's just sometimes the execution, a lot of left to be desired. So I can't go too high on this movie. I'm going to give Bright a 6.5 out of 10. I think if you're a fan of fantasy lore, you should definitely check this movie out because the concept, the premise, the world that they built is great, but the story that they told, not so great.
Yeah, I think that this movie was very serviceable. I wasn't like annoyed or upset by watching it or anything like that, but there's a lot of problems with it. The pacing, a lot of the generics to it, and even though, like I said, being an original story, it's very generic. But Joel Edgerton, I think that he's a good reason to watch this movie. For sure. But all in all, it's just not going to be a standout in my head. I've seen a lot of great movies recently, and this one, I feel like it's just going to be kind of forgettable. So I will say that I'm going to recommend to watch it because I think it's something you can throw on since you already have Netflix, but I'm going to go a little bit lower with a 6 out of 10. It's just barely serviceable for me, but it crossed, it rode that line of being like, this could be bad, but it wasn't.
Yeah, and leading up to this, I'm sure you've seen the articles on the internet, like, this is the worst movie of the year. It's by far not the worst movie of the year. There's tons of worse movies out there.
Yeah, we'll be telling you those soon.
Buffs. All right, so that's it for our review of Bright. What'd you guys think of the Netflix movie? What'd you think of the chemistry between Will Smith and Joel Edgerton? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We appreciate all the support at Cinema Buffs.
That's right. And also, this is the end of the year.
Last new movie for the year.
Yeah, so next up, we're just going to be bringing you our top movies, worst movies, and what we're looking forward to next year. So look out for that. But don't you forget,
there's no place like the theater.